Whispering Library.
It was a rainy night when Ria, a 1-year-old college student, decided to stay late in the old city library. She had a research paper due in the morning, and procrastination had finally caught up with her. The library, built in the late 1800s, was a massive brick building with arched windows and a grand wooden staircase that creaked under the slightest weight. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rumbled like the library itself was groaning. Ria entered quietly, her backpack heavy with books, and her umbrella dripping water onto the polished marble floor. The front doors were slightly ajar, and she pushed them closed, noticing the lock click into place behind her. A chill ran down her spine, though she shrugged it off as the damp cold. Most of the library's lights were dim, flickering occasionally, casting strange shadows that danced across the shelves. It was eerily quiet. Too quiet, except for the sound of rain hammering against the roof and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. Ria headed to the second floor, where the history section was located, determined to find the rare books she needed. As she walked between the tall shelves, her footsteps echoing faintly, she felt the sensation of being watched. She turned quickly, but no one was there. The library was supposedly empty at this hour, and she was alone. Trying to focus, she pulled out a thick, dusty book from the top shelf, an old leather-bound volume on colonial history. The smell of musty pages filled her nose. Then she heard it. A faint whisper. "Don't look." Ria froze, her fingers still gripping the book. The voice was soft, almost like a breath. She spun around, eyes scanning the aisle, but there was nothing. Just empty shelves looming silently. Shaking her head, she muttered to herself, "It's just my imagination. It's just the wind." But the whisper came again, this time a little louder. "Ria?" Her heart started pounding. She looked down the long aisle, half expecting someone to appear, but it was empty. The lights flickered more violently now, plunging her briefly into darkness. When they flicked back on, the shadows seemed wrong. They moved independently, stretching across the shelves like dark fingers reaching for her. Panicking slightly, Ria tried to leave. She hurried to the staircase, but something strange happened. Every exit she tried led her back to the same aisle. The library seemed to have rearranged itself. Bookshelves that were once rows now blocked her path. Doors led to walls. Even the main entrance seemed miles away. The whispers grew louder, surrounding her now, repeating her name. She stumbled into a narrow corner and pressed herself against the wall, breathing heavily. "You can't leave." Ria's phone was dead strangely. The battery had drained to zero, despite being fully charged that morning. The flickering lights overhead made the shadows dance violently. She realized with growing terror that the whispers were coming from the shadows themselves. Every shelf, every dark corner seemed alive, murmuring threats and names in a language she couldn't understand. Desperate, she ran, weaving between the shelves. The books rattled as if pushed by invisible hands. The air grew colder, her breath visible in misty clouds. Every step she took echoed, but sometimes the echoes came first, and sometimes after. The world felt twisted, like she had stepped into a nightmare where the laws of reality no longer applied. In her panic, Ria remembered a story she had once heard about the library, that it was cursed. A librarian had died there decades ago under mysterious circumstances, and some claimed her spirit never left. Scholars had reported books flying off shelves and whispers in the dead of night. People who stayed too long were said to vanish without a trace. Ria had always thought it was just a legend. Now, she wasn't so sure. Hours seemed to pass, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning here. Every aisle looked identical. Every shadow seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. Exhausted and terrified, Ria slumped against a bookshelf, covering her ears to block out the whispers. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here." The voice seemed to echo from inside her skull. Her eyes fell on the book she had pulled from the shelf earlier. Its cover was now etched with strange symbols that hadn't been there before. Trembling, she opened it and found every page filled with her name, written over and over in dark ink that seemed to crawl slightly on the paper. The whispers intensified, chanting in sync with the words, "Ria, Ria, Ria." Terrified beyond reason, she threw the book across the floor. It landed open at the center of the aisle, and she saw herself reflected in its shiny pages, but the reflection was not right. It grinned at her with teeth she did not possess. Ria ran blindly, tripping over the stair railing and tumbling down a short flight of steps. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of her. When she struggled to her feet, she realized she was in a part of the library she had never seen. Ancient statues lined the walls, their stone eyes seeming to follow her every move. The whispers had become a deafening chorus, filling the room from every direction. Suddenly, the statues' mouths moved. They were speaking, joining the whispers. "You belong here now. Forever." Rhea screamed, but no sound came out. Panic turned to exhaustion, and her knees gave out. She collapsed on the cold floor, tears streaming down her face. The whispers grew louder, closer, surrounding her in a living fog of sound. When the security guard arrived the next morning, the library was silent. The rain had stopped, and sunlight streamed through the windows. But Rhea was gone. The doors were locked from the inside, and no trace of her could be found except the book she had dropped. The pages were filled with her name, over and over again, as if the library itself had consumed her identity, and perhaps even her soul. Scholars later claimed that the library sometimes claimed those who lingered too long. And late at night, when the wind howls through the city streets, you can hear whispers in the library, calling out names that no one should ever hear. And sometimes, they call yours.
Open.
Arjun had always been practical. He never believed in ghosts or urban legends. When he moved to Kolkata for his new job, he needed an affordable apartment, and the rent at a small old building on Bhattacharya Street was surprisingly low. The landlord, an elderly man with a toothless smile, assured him that it was a quiet building and that previous tenants were happy. The apartment itself was small but cozy, with a living room, kitchen, bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. One room, however, seemed odd. It had no furniture, no light switch, and no windows. It was just a bare, empty space, cold and silent. Arjun shrugged it off, thinking maybe it had been left for storage. The first night in the apartment was uneventful. He slept peacefully, despite the occasional creak of the old building. But the next night, strange sounds woke him. There was knocking from the empty room. Light, rhythmic, deliberate. Curious and slightly unnerved, he approached the door. The knocking stopped the moment he reached for the knob. Arjun hesitated, then opened the door slowly. The room was empty, just as he had expected. But the air inside was colder than the rest of the apartment, and a strange smell, like wet stone, hung faintly. Shivering, he closed the door and returned to bed, convincing himself it was nothing. The following days, things worsened. The knocking came every night, sometimes a slow, soft tapping, sometimes loud, rapid drumming, echoing through the apartment. Objects in other rooms occasionally shifted slightly, though he could never catch anyone in the act. He began to dread the empty room, avoiding it entirely. Then came the night when Arjun's friend, Samir, visited. They were sitting in the living room, chatting, when Samir jokingly said, "Why don't you show me the mysterious room you keep talking about?" Arjun reluctantly led him there. The room was exactly as before, bare, cold, and silent. "Creepy," Samir muttered, stepping inside. But as he did, something impossible happened. The walls seemed to stretch, then contract. The door behind him disappeared. Samir's voice echoed from inside, but it was strained, distorted. "Arjun, help!" Arjun ran to the door, tried to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. Panic gripped him as the room seemed to shift, rearranging itself. The ceiling lowered slightly, the floor tilting ever so subtly, and the walls stretched in impossible angles. He could hear Samir's breathing, fast and shallow, but couldn't see him through the now empty doorway. Then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. Arjun blinked, and the door was back. He opened it. There was nothing. The room was gone. In its place was a normal wall, painted the same as the rest of the apartment. No windows, no door, no trace that it had ever existed. Arjun's mind raced. He couldn't explain it. Over the next few nights, he noticed more strange phenomena. Furniture in the apartment shifted slightly. Lights flickered without cause. And sometimes he felt sudden chills passing through him, as if someone or something was brushing past. He tried researching the building's history. Decades ago, it had been home to a wealthy family. One night, a servant reportedly vanished inside a room that no one could find afterward. Legends among the neighbors spoke of doors that appeared and disappeared, of spaces that trapped souls. Arjun laughed nervously, trying to convince himself it was coincidence. But deep down, he knew there was something wrong with that apartment. One evening, he returned from work to find a new anomaly. The wall where the mysterious room had vanished seemed slightly off. A faint outline of a door could be seen under the paint, almost like the wall was breathing. As he touched it, the outline pulsed, and he heard the faintest whisper, "Come back." Terrified, Arjun backed away, but curiosity gnawed at him. He pressed his ear against the wall, trying to understand the voice. It was faint, almost like someone trapped behind a thick veil of stone and paint crying for help. He grabbed a hammer and tried to break the wall, but it was unnaturally solid. Every strike produced a hollow, echoing sound, and the whispers grew louder, almost mocking him. That night, sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the room walls stretching impossibly, a dark void in the center, and Samir's terrified face appearing and disappearing. The knocking returned, louder than ever, shaking the very apartment. Days turned into nights of sleepless paranoia. Arjun started noticing reflections in mirrors that didn't match reality shadows, moving in impossible directions. Brief glimpses of the vanished room, even when he was in the living room. Every door in the apartment seemed alive, slightly shifting, teasing him with glimpses of the impossible space. Then, one night, the apartment seemed to pulse. The air vibrated, walls breathing slowly, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed, though no one was present. A soft, distorted voice whispered in his ear, "You cannot leave." Arjun realized he was trapped, not just in the apartment, but somehow in the building itself. The walls, the floors, the very air seemed alive, watching, shifting, keeping him prisoner. He felt an intense weight pressing on his chest, the room or the building deciding he could not escape. The next morning, the landlord came to check on him. Arjun tried to speak, but no words came. When the landlord entered the apartment, he found it perfectly normal, quiet, nothing amiss. Arjun was gone. No trace of him remained, except the faint outline of a door on the wall, the vanished room, like a memory etched into paint. Neighbors whispered about the building afterward, saying the apartment had claimed another tenant. They said sometimes you could hear faint knocking at night, and if you pressed your ear to the walls, you could hear voices begging for help trapped, like echoes from another dimension. And the vanishing room? Some say it still exists, waiting for the next curious soul who dares enter. Maya had always been drawn to antique stores. There was something magical about holding objects that had lived through decades, maybe even centuries. One humid afternoon in Jaipur, while wandering through a narrow lane lined with tiny shops, she stumbled upon a shop tucked between two crumbling buildings. Its wooden door creaked loudly as she entered, and the smell of old wood and dust hit her immediately. Among the shelves cluttered with porcelain figurines, old clocks, and faded paintings, she spotted it. A mirror with a gold frame, intricately carved with roses and vines. Despite the layer of dust covering its surface, the mirror gleamed strangely, as if it was aware she was looking at it. Maya felt drawn to it, an inexplicable pull she couldn't resist. "Ah, you've got a good eye," said the shopkeeper, a hunched old man with milky eyes. "That mirror, it's special. It's not just a reflection, it holds memories. Take care with it." Maya laughed softly, charmed by his cryptic words. She bought the mirror, carried it home, and placed it against the wall in her bedroom. That night, as she prepared for bed, she caught her reflection and felt a shiver. Something was off. Her reflection lagged slightly behind her movements, like a video buffering. She rubbed her eyes, blaming exhaustion. The next morning, she noticed it again, subtle, almost imperceptible. But the third night, the horror began. Maya awoke to a faint tapping sound, like fingernails against glass. Her eyes darted to the mirror. The reflection smiled at her. She wasn't smiling. Frozen in fear, Maya watched as the reflection raised a hand, slow and deliberate, reaching toward her. She backed away, heart pounding. The hand pressed against the glass, leaving a faint misty mark that slowly spread across the surface. She grabbed a cloth to wipe it, but as she did, the reflection winked at her. Not her, the reflection. Over the next few days, the mirror's behavior escalated. The reflection would appear when she wasn't standing in front of it, sometimes even moving independently. Objects in the room seemed subtly different. In the reflection, her bed slightly shifted, a picture frame tilted, the curtains drawn differently. She began to feel watched, even when the mirror was covered. Maya tried to remove the mirror, but it was unnaturally heavy. Even with help, she could not budge it. It was as if it had fused with the wall. She began having nightmares. Endless hallways lined with mirrors, all reflecting her, but none of them her true self. Shadows moved behind her in the reflections, whispering her name. She would wake up drenched in sweat, heart hammering, certain that the reflection had been watching her while she slept. One night, in a desperate attempt to destroy it, she smashed the mirror with a hammer. The sound of shattering glass filled the room, but instead of breaking completely, the pieces seemed to float in midair, reassembling themselves perfectly. The reflection smiled wider than ever, triumphant. A cold hand shot through the mirror's surface, grazing her shoulder. Maya screamed, but the hand left no mark. Terrified, she tried covering the mirror with sheets, then cardboard, even walls of books. Nothing worked. The reflection simply peered over, around, through. Every shiny surface in her apartment became a portal for it. The polished floor, the small decorative mirrors, her phone screen, even the window reflecting moonlight. The reflection was everywhere, always smiling, always reaching. Maya began to withdraw from life. She stopped going to work, stopped answering calls, and rarely left her apartment. Friends came by, concerned, but she refused to let anyone see the mirror. Sometimes she caught glimpses of herself moving differently in the reflection gestures she hadn't made, expressions she hadn't worn. And each time, the shadow behind her reflection grew more distinct, darker, more human. Weeks passed. The apartment fell silent except for her whispered panic. Then, one night, she woke to find the shadow fully formed in the mirror. It had no eyes, only darkness where her own should have been, and a cruel, crooked smile that mirrored hers. It raised a hand again, and this time, Maya could not move. She felt herself being pulled toward the surface, into the cold, endless void of the reflection. The next morning, the apartment was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the windows, birds chirped outside, and everything seemed normal, except Maya was gone. The mirror hung on the wall, perfectly intact, gold frame gleaming. The only difference was the reflection. Now, someone else looked back. Her smile, her eyes, trapped forever behind the glass. The antique store owner smiled knowingly when someone new came looking for the mirror. "Careful," he warned. "Mirrors aren't just for seeing yourself. Sometimes they see you first." Even today, it is said that if you look into that mirror at night, you might catch a fleeting glimpse of Maya or someone who came before her. And if the reflection smiles when you do, well, you may never leave the glass again.